welcome back. So after platform impact and platform regulation, we are now going to do a deep dive into platform governance, the third pillar of our focus of today. I'm going to introduce our panel, which is going to focus, because as Law said at the beginning, unlike traditional business platforms, orchestrate complex ecosystem and co-create value with their participants. And our governance panel is going to explore the principles, the governance principles of platform, the challenges associated with an ecosystem management, and the importance of trust in particular. Moderator for our final panel is Azeem, an award-winning entrepreneur, analyst, strategist, and investor. You will likely know him as the face and voice behind Exponential View, the leading newsletter and HBR podcast on the impact of technology on our future economy and society. Azeem, over to you and your panel.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Petra. So our discussion is going to cover off questions of platform governance, and I think we should get straight in to each of your opening statements, and perhaps I'll tell the audience who we have with us first. So we have Frédéric Mazzella, the founder and president of, one of the true car sharing platforms in the world, BlaBlaCar, now a unicorn, a community of more than 100 million members. We have Rob Chesnut, who was until recently the Chief Ethics Officer of Airbnb. Rob has just published a book, Institutional Integrity, which is on how smart companies can lead an ethical revolution. And of course, we have Sasha Michaud, who is the co-founder of Glovo, which is an incredibly fast-growing on-demand service. So we are going to kick off with Frédéric. Frédéric, please, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, hello everyone. I have some. I wanted to talk about the way we build trust in our community. I have some slides. I'll try to show them, or maybe Petra, you can help with that and diffuse the slides if you have them. Okay, so let's begin with the first ones. It's very simple slides. It's just to give an illustration of what we do. So today, as you said, Azeem, BlaBlaCar is a real sharing platform, because we have drivers and passengers who are going the same way, who are sharing their rides. So we do pure carpooling, and it's people like you and me who share their cars everywhere they can go. And it's in 22 countries now. What we have done over the years is, and maybe we can go to the next slide, is to build trust, because frankly, the thing is, people have to trust each other to travel together. And this has been a key component in the way we've been able to deploy the community. So it's been articulated through a model that we created, which is called the DREAMS model, which we can just see on the next slide. It's based on 6 pillars. So DREAMS stands for D for declared, R for rated, E for engaged, A for active, M for moderated, and S for social. It's the 6 pillars of trust that you are able to build in an online community using online tools, I would say digital tools. So the information you have to have access to in order to build your trust towards someone you've never met is can be seen along these 6 pillars, because some information will be declared. So it's like your first name or your picture or your what you do for a living, if you're a teacher, if you like music, well, all those things, and your age and everything. So things that you declare. Then the information which is rated. So that will be, of course, the ratings that people leave to each other, which really help in building the trust. Engage is when you, for example, do a booking. So like you book, you pay online, and this engages you in the transactions. And then active is the kind of information you'll see. For example, someone registered 3 years ago and he was connected 2 hours ago, or he's live right now, or this kind of information, or he published I don't know, 179 trips already, and you see the activities. This also creates more trust towards the person. The M is for moderated, so it's everything we do at the platform to moderate the exchanges. And the S is for social, because people can link their BlaBlaCar profile with some other social networks like Facebook or LinkedIn. And this also creates some more trust. Then what we were really interested in was to see if it really had an impact. So we tried to measure the level of trust we were able to build thanks to this model. And so we can go to the next slide. We've got some amazing results. We had conducted this study a few years ago. And actually, we asked people to rank on a scale from 0 to 5 the level of trust they had in several types of people. So from social media contact to family members. And we considered a rating of 4 or 5 out of 5 to be a very high trust. And this has conducted us to see that actually on this scale, we had BlaBlaCar on the podium, number 3, right after the family members and the friends, because actually you know a lot of things about the people you'll be traveling with, and this has been very instrumental in making people go on and carpool together. You can see that the level of trust we're able to achieve thanks to this model and all the information we share with our members is a lot higher than the level of trust you have between neighbors or between colleagues. Neighbors are 42% and colleagues are 58%. So again, the percentage we give is the percentage of people who gave a rating of 4 or 5 out of 5 in terms of trust. So for us, it was kind of the proof. So this study has been done on 18,000 respondents in 11 countries. So it's really a kind of bulletproof data with a lot of participants. And so then this is about the theory that I wanted to share with you, because it's been the way we've articulated this, which has made the success of the growing community of BlaBlaCar from European countries to also in Russia, Brazil, and everywhere we are on the planet. And so it's been summarized as well in a study we published with Arun Sundararajan, whom you've seen in a previous conference, I think, and who's a specialist on trust. And we had worked on this study together. The study is called Entering the Trust Age. You can find it on the net. And there is a lot of other information in it, which you may find useful if you have to create or deploy your platform and create trust between people. This is a way of doing the governance. I had a last slide, but I think it was just about this. It was about the BlaBla brand effect as well. We were curious to see how much trust was generated by the Dreams model itself, and how much trust was generated by our brand itself. So we asked people, how much trust would you have if you had access to the exact same information you have on BlaBlaCar, but it would be a generic platform. It would be a platform which doesn't hold the brand BlaBlaCar. We wanted to see if there was some kind of a brand effect from our brand itself, and not only from the model, the Dreams model itself. And actually, there is a brand effect, which we have measured to be of 21%. Between the trust people would have on profiles diffused on a generic platform, and in profiles diffused on the exact same profiles but diffused with the BlaBlaCar brand next to it. And so this also proves that it's always worth investing in your brand. And then the last thing was about a link to the last slide was a link on the Entering the Trust Stage study we conducted with NYU Stern Professor Arun Sundararajan as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Frédéric. There's a lot to think about in your trust framework, a lot to dream about, dare I say it. What I'd like to do is turn over to Rob, who I guess it's the morning for you, Rob, and to hear your opening statement, please.
Thanks, and I'll follow Frédéric and talk about trust for a little bit as well, because I think if you are operating a platform, you are in the trust business. You don't have a product yourself. You're in the business of helping people trust each other on your platform. And I think one thing we've seen, I've been involved in platforms ever since the early days of eBay. And it's been really interesting to watch what's happening with trust and the obligations of platforms during that period. There's a study called the Edelman Trust Survey. Does a global view of trust around the world. It shows right now that trust is at an all-time low across all elements. Trust in government is at an all-time low. Trust in the media, trust in corporations. And so one of the aspects of their study is if you want to build trust, trust is made up of two things. It's made up of competence and integrity. And of those two factors, integrity is actually the more important. It's actually 3 times as powerful as competence. So if you want to build trust in a platform, one thing you've got to be looking at is, how are people looking at your brand, the integrity of what you do and the way that you operate? In the old days, for example, at eBay, I think executives tended to shy away from controversial subjects. Platforms tended to be very hands-off. The famous phrase, "we're only a platform," was something you heard over and over again. I think those days are past. I think people now are looking for platforms to become leaders in integrity. And in fact, I think they're looking at companies as a whole to be leaders in solving some of the world's greatest problems. I think some of this is a reflection of the fact that many of us have lost confidence in government's ability or willingness to address some of the world's biggest issues. And we're increasingly looking to companies to do it. And I think we've seen the charge being led by a couple of different groups. One's been employees. We talk about the pressure that government puts on companies and platforms. A lot of pressure has actually come from inside the companies themselves. We've seen, in the old days, I think employees, if they saw their company not operating with integrity, they'd sit on their hands. Not anymore. I mean, we are in an age now where employees are empowered as never before. They're mobile. And if they want to go to work every day, not just to make a paycheck, they want to feel like they're changing the world. They want to feel like they are doing good in the world. And if they see something they don't like inside of their own company, they're talking to each other on Blind and on Slack. They are blogging about it. They're tweeting about it. They're walking out. They're organizing walkouts now. So, in one sense, I think companies are feeling the heat from inside to operate with integrity. And they're also feeling it from consumers. We are in an age of conscious consumerism. Data shows that like never before, consumers are now considering their view of the integrity, purpose of the company that they're doing business with. And if they see a company whose values are aligned, they will become passionate consumers, defenders of the brand. On the other hand, if they see a company whose values are not aligned with their own values, they're taking their money and they're moving it somewhere else. So I think it's a tough time to be a leader in that the world's eyes are watching you. You are now expected to do more than just make money. Making money is critical and companies need it in order to survive. But we are gradually abandoning this notion that leaders need to focus on shareholder value and shareholder value alone. Shareholder value as a concept is something I think that has led a lot of companies for decades to focus on hitting a quarterly number, hit that stock price, get that stock price up. And if it hits if the stock goes up, then it's good. And if it doesn't cause the stock to go up this quarter, then it's bad. That's created a lot of short-term thinking. And I frankly think that's caused a lot of companies to cut some ethical corners. And we are now recognizing as a world that we need more from companies. We need companies to step up and solve some of the world's biggest problems. And that may mean that they may need to start considering things like how much carbon they're dumping into the air. Where are they getting their supplies on the other side of the world? And what are the working conditions there? How do you treat your customers? How do you treat your employees? In this new age of leadership, I think that companies need to have a North Star. They need to have a purpose. And that purpose isn't profit. Profit is not a purpose. You've got to have a reason why what you're doing is good for the world. And you need to be able to communicate it. You need to be able to, I think, articulate it. And in this new world, I think if you can articulate that purpose and inspire others, you can come out ahead. And in fact, integrity can be wind at your back. On the other hand, I think a failure to do it can put you behind in this curve. Yeah, somebody just mentioned in the notes that eBay used to chase the stock price quarter by quarter. And I think, unfortunately, there's an element of truth to that. Amazon didn't. And that was one of the reasons I think Amazon got ahead, because they set out a very clear message that they were going to operate for the long term. I think eBay, you're seeing changes at eBay, but look at Airbnb. Airbnb just announced that they're filing to go public. And I think you'll see in their filings a clear desire to operate for the long term, not to chase a quarterly number. You see this, for example, in discrimination, how they handled discrimination on their platform. You know, a few years back, if you recall, Airbnb was racked with claims that users were being discriminated against. And, you know, Airbnb's response to it was not, we're only a platform. I remember Brian looked at me and said, Rob, if this is happening on our platform, we are failing as a company. Don't care what it costs.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to fix it. And he did. And I think it's that kind of purpose-driven leadership that will inspire integrity and inspire confidence and ultimately build trust in platforms.
Thank you, Rob. That was a very powerful statement. And on the point of Airbnb and its integrity, I think the firm had to get rid of 1.4 million hosts who didn't sign up to your anti-bigotry clause, which was sellers who you're saying, please go away.
We lost 1.1% of our users when we ask everyone to take a simple pledge that they wouldn't discriminate based on the color of someone's skin or their race or nationality. And I think Airbnb's response to that was, you know what, in the long run, we're going to be better off standing for something in that kind of circumstance than chasing the number. So.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that statement. I think we just have Sasha now left to go to do your introductory remarks. And if you can just keep them to 5 minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go as quick as possible. I think we're running late.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'll give a quick intro to Glovo for those of us who don't know us. We're not a multi-category on-demand platform. We were founded in Barcelona in 2015. We have about 1,500 employees worldwide. We're in 22 countries, around 600 cities operating. And we have about 45,000 partners as local stores or restaurants on the platform. And we have over 50,000 active Glovers. There are couriers, on-demand couriers who work on an active basis. And our vision is to give easy access to anything in your city. I think it's fair to say, you know, entrepreneurs are generally naive optimists. I think that's good, because if you really were not like that, you probably would never start your business. And the reality is, you know, with Glovo's case, you know, when we started this, and I thought, well, you know, wouldn't it be great that people just order anything in their city through their smartphone, and we, you know, go to these local stores and restaurants and give them incremental revenue, and then we'd have all these couriers who, you know, in their free time could actually, you know, earn some extra hours and etc. And the reality is often very different from that. I mean, you wake up a few years later when you're having a massive socio-economic impact in the cities where you work. You find out you're in a massive debate of the future of work, and you say, what's going on here? We just had a cool idea and we thought it was great for everyone. And the reality is that it's often very different. For fact, the profile of our careers, I mean, most of them are not just looking for a couple of hours a day extra work. We're often a financial lifeline for their families. I'm not saying they didn't necessarily all dedicate full time to the job, but it's certainly they're here for the economic impact. And so we need to take that into consideration. And then the next piece is obviously regulatory relationship towards that is the same, no? That it needs to be, these workers are in need of income and they need to be protected. And then the importance to our partners, you know, what I mentioned earlier, I mean, you know, we consider it would be a nice incremental income to their core business. And at the end of the day, I mean, COVID is a good example of that, of how we've become a lifeline for them. You know, 90% of Glovo's partners are actually SMEs. And these guys have been the hardest hit by COVID. So they're actually really relying on platform and companies like Glovo to actually survive So we've suddenly become super important in the cities where we go, and with size comes responsibility. Just looking at the bigger picture, I think, going back to our partners, I think there's a massive opportunity now as consumer habits, I think, have changed. They've been accelerated with COVID. I think wanting things immediately now is in essence, instead of 24, 48 hours. The great thing, the retailers who've generally been the last to really adapt to this digital revolution we're living, have probably been the last to go into this. And I think they have a unique opportunity because they're the closest their product is to the consumer. The great e-commerce giants generally have the product thousands and thousands of kilometers away from the consumer, and it's never going to get them 30 minutes. Whereas the retailers can actually suddenly convert themselves into virtual warehouses. And I think they need to move quickly because the giants are not going to wait around. They're already moving into the cities. They're already bringing the products close to the cities. And our position is we're an ally to them. Going back a little bit to governance and regulation, I think as well, and certainly we're to blame from that, digital companies and platforms, we often say, flexibility, give people what they want, give the workers what they want. But the reality is there's different necessities in different regions. Glovo's in four continents. The realities in Ivory Coast compared to Barcelona, compared to Kiev, compared to Buenos Aires are very different. Where in the Southern Europe, social protection and rights are fundamental for workers, and I think in the whole of EU, and I think it's something that I think generally most of us agree with. In Ivory Coast or Latin America, it's more important that actually most people are paid in cash. So we're actually fixing that. So we're actually seen by governments as a great tool to actually give transparency to something which is a submerged economy. So to be very, very quick, from our perspective, I think we need to, we believe that we do need regulation, specifically in our sector. However, for regulators and policymakers to do correct regulation, they need to be better informed. Something that with my discussions with policymakers, they're very ill-informed or little informed about how our approach works, who the people are on the platform. And I think that's something across pretty much all the regions. It's not something specific to one country. And then going back to, I think just on the trust mentioned, I think it's a great word. I think we're to blame. The platforms of not being transparent enough. Transparent builds trust, but not just with the consumer. I think it builds it with the regulators. And I think we need to change the conversation. And I hope that was quick enough.
Thank you so much, Sasha. And you drew attention there to, I think, one of the key dimensions of the question of governance. What is governance of any organization, institution, or platform? It's about managing the conflicts that might arise between different participants on a platform, and how you go about thinking about those conflicts, which might include the value sharing, right? Who gets which piece of the pie? I thought what was quite interesting in your articulation was that you also identified that between the SMEs on the one side and the riders on the other, there were non-platform participants whose considerations come to mind. In your case, you were talking about the government authorities in Ivory Coast who have different needs, but you were trying to attend to those needs than those local requirements. And I guess in the case of Airbnb, some of the non-participant stakeholders you had to deal with would have been city authorities in different parts of the world. But I'm curious, with these three experts in front of us, which is how do they think about the question of what does it mean for a platform to exhibit good governance? I mean, what is good governance in the context of a platform? And perhaps, Frédéric, since you've had the longest time to catch your breath, you'd like to give us maybe a short response, and we can check in with the others.
In terms of governance, what you need to be very careful about. So some components were mentioned, which were like a transparency. So transparency is very important, but also I think that the rules themselves need to be very clear and simple, and that you need to make sure the entire community is aware of them. And I think once you've done that, you've gone a long way, actually. If your rules are too complex, then it creates suspicion, it creates fear. So it does not really help you in administrating the community. And so making very clear rules is always more complicated than we think. It's just like making a synthesis. It takes longer than just writing a text. And so if you want to make a good synthesis, then you need to spend a lot of time thinking about the exact words you would be using. And I would tend to think that it's the same for the rules. It takes time to create very, very simple and fair rules. Once you've done that, you're able to diffuse them in the community, make sure everybody understands them. And once you've done that, you're on the way to having a governance which is transparent and understood by everybody.
That's really helpful. This idea that if the rules are transparent, people know what they're signing up to and they can decide to sign up to or not, is a sort of a powerful idea. Rob, how do you think about what it means for a platform to have good governance?
Well, I think it starts with identifying your stakeholders. If once you accept the principle that it's not just all about making money, who are you operating for, and what are the metrics? Look, I think companies naturally do what they measure, and everybody's really good at measuring the financials. Everybody knows how much money they're making, what their profits numbers are, and what their expenses are. But I think taking Airbnb again as an example, Airbnb's got 5 stakeholders. Everybody in the company knows who they are. It's their investors, the guest, the host, the employees, and also the community at large. And I think one of the things that you're going to see a lot more over the next 5 to 10 years is companies are going to get a lot better at specifically identifying who their stakeholders are and what are the metrics that they use to measure the health of those stakeholders. And I think when you are operating for stakeholders as opposed to simply shareholders, I think you start to think about things like whether what you're doing is good for the community at large. And when you do that, the governments may feel less of a need to govern you. If once you start recognizing that you've got that obligation, you can start to build trust with a bigger community. And I think stave off some regulation that might be harmful.
Can I pick you up on one thought there? So of course, Sasha is from Barcelona, and Airbnb had an interesting time in Barcelona. One of the stakeholders you didn't raise, you talked the community at large, but I didn't hear whether that applied to the specific cities or municipalities in which you had concentrations of people. So looking back at what happened in Barcelona and some other cities, what did you learn about what Airbnb did right from the governance of those external stakeholders? And how would you do it differently now that we've been through some of the frictions and we've come through an agreement, got to an agreement?
I think working through that world of what's good for the community, it can be messy, particularly in the earlier days, right? So I think a lot of the challenges that Airbnb had working with communities, the important thing was that Airbnb recognized that it had an obligation to those communities, right? Airbnb never took the view that, well, that's not our problem. We're here to make money, and as long as it's legal, we're going to go forward. I don't think that was ever Airbnb's approach. I think their approach was, if we're not good for a community, we need to figure out why, and we need to figure out what's the best path forward. Now, what you were often dealing with in these situations were, the entrenched organizations, the hotels, who naturally don't want you. So they're going to put up a very aggressive effort, both politically and in a marketing perspective, to advance the narrative that you're bad for the community. So what you've got to do is you've got to work through with the communities, often battling with entrenched interest in order to get it to a good place. And I think ultimately Airbnb has gotten to a good place with a lot of communities around the world. Look, Airbnb voluntarily collects tax money to support the communities and has collected billions in taxes. And I think they've also worked through reasonable regulations with localities, that I think recognize that Airbnb brings a lot of good to communities, does a lot of great things for people in the communities, and if unchecked and completely unregulated, could cause harm. And that's why Airbnb, I think, has worked and agreed to a number of those regulations.
Thank you so much, Sasha. I got into Rob's follow-up there, but I'd like to bring the original question back to you, which is, what does it, for you, what does it mean for a platform to exhibit good governance?
I'll try not to repeat what my co-panelists said. I think they're bang on. I think, you know, for me, it's often be auto-regulating yourselves. We're often ahead of the curve with regulation. And I think, you know, one of the best ways is to auto-regulate yourself. And I'll give you some examples in our case, which is quite simple, you know. And I think Bob mentioned it about understanding your stakeholders is key. Knowing them and then, but really understanding what makes them tick. And that also becomes good business, because if you do things for them, then they'll come back. A good example would be our partners, for example, you know, really understand their margins, their business margins and how that works. We'll identify what, you know, how far we can go with our commissions and how far we can work together. The same with our couriers, and obviously the same with everything in our ecosystem around that. And then also the impact we're having in our cities in our case, because we're very similar to Airbnb and then we're a city company and have massive impact. So I really think auto-regulating ourselves, and I mentioned it before, but also being transparent about that as much as you can without giving away trade secrets, put you in a position, because otherwise they're going to regulate you, and generally strict regulation is not good for anyone. It's certainly not good for the stakeholders who end up their income's limited, or the opportunities of work is limited, and our growth and our potential socioeconomic impact in the cities is limited. So either we do it ourselves and we're transparent about it, or we get hit in the head. And unfortunately, I think, you know, tech companies have probably been a little bit guilty of not seeing that coming. Not all companies, there's some great examples, but I think generally, you know, tech was going to fix everything 15 years ago. We're going to save the world. And now look at, I mean, you know, we're the enemy number one. And we've got to be realistic that we have a great opportunity. And I think ethics and auto-regulation are the key.
So I'm going to come back with a follow-up for you, and then we'll send it back around your other panelists. So I'm curious about the leader, the balance the leader has to strike. So I remember when Airbnb rolled out in the UK, and we had 9 flats and house bites running around as well, and there was a market share chase. And the perspective from the product managers is also about, how do I deliver to my consumer, my seller? How do I deliver on the buyer side? How do I eliminate friction? And one of the things that strikes me is that at those moments, perhaps you don't have the mental space to think about the impact on the sort of second or third order stakeholder who isn't on the dashboard. And I guess, Sasha, your firm is the youngest of the 3 here, and is in that trigger. I'll lay out kind of a couple of considerations and answer how you like, in a sense. How do you think about the competencies and the skill sets that you need in the teams that land in local markets and they have to grow out? And perhaps another way of asking that question is, do you actually have that conversation which says, perhaps we should grow slower in city X because we are pushing up against, you know, other non-platform participants, and it could cause an issue?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to answer that, and that we were super strategic and everything. To be honest, I mean, we're a 5-year-old company. We've grown incredibly quickly, and most of the time it's really learning as you go, which might not be great, you know, to regulators' ears, because with the size of the company, then, you know, we should be more responsible. But at the end of the day, you're competing against companies, in our case, much bigger than ourselves in pretty much every. So I think it's got a lot to do with this auto governance internally that we have. And, you know, I mean, we have an ethics committee, but we've had one for a long time, and this is very unusual for a startup our size and our age. And that comes more into play. We've probably, I can be honest, we've never had the decision to say slow down in that city. I'll be fair, but the launching team and the management team that we put into the country, there's a clear trait on that person, and there's a key part of that which is ethics and doing things right and looking after the ecosystem. That you know, and that goes back to what Rob said earlier about stakeholders and really knowing them well and what's important to them.
Frédéric, maybe we could bring you in on this this discussion, which is around how you think about either the competencies or the skill sets that you need to bundle, or whether you've actually had moments where you've exhibited auto-regulation, as Sasha terms it, in BlaBlaCar's recent history.
Yeah, well, the main thing is in order to auto-regulate yourself, it is good that you actually experience the product yourself as well. We've got, a principle at BlaBlaCar which is called Be the Member. Initially, it was a principle which we called Think It, Build It, Use It, which was kind of a philosophy of not only being the builders of the platform, but really also be the members that we were building the service for. And when you say build it, think it, build it, use it, you actually have several roles which allow you to see your service from different angles. And it really helps you in auto-regulating yourself and making the rules as fair and as understandable as possible, and make also the best product you can. So it is a method for really achieving the fact that you're not just building a service for others, but also for yourself. And sooner or later, you become to be the most demanding customer for your service. And when you are the most demanding customer, then you're usually on a good path to making the rules as fair as possible.
Rob, you've got a lot of experience in this. You've just put this all down in a book. So I want to maybe ask you a slightly different question, which is, do you, Sasha talked about an ethics committee that is that exists now. How do you recommend, from a governance perspective, that these aspects, which may be non-financial, right, they may be slightly harder to measure, be sort of executed within the organization? Is it centers of excellence? Is it training down the line? What is the right approach?
Yeah, there's not one answer. It's a number of things. It has to start at the top, because look, if the board is not bought into what you're measuring and who your stakeholders are and what your goals are, then you're going to get nowhere. So I think it has to start with aligning the board, the CEO, and ensuring that everybody's on the same page about what you're trying to accomplish. Then I think leaders have to be willing to talk about it. Too often, like, integrity and ethics are unspoken. They're a poster on the wall, or they're buried in a code of conduct 3 links deep in your intranet. I think if you really want to operate a company with integrity, leaders have to be willing to speak it, talk about it, and inspire people inside the company, and make sure it's really clear to everybody that's the way that we're going to operate here. Once you do that, though, look, at Airbnb, we had ethics ambassadors. We had people that were engineers. They were in marketing. They were in sales. They were in customer support. These are people that we depended on to get input on what are the ethical issues that you're facing inside of your group, and get their input to get the right answer. Because look, when it comes to integrity, there isn't always one clear answer. It can get kind of gray. And if you want to get it right, you got to be willing to listen to people with different life experiences and backgrounds.
Thank you. Now, we've got a minute or two left on this this panel, unless I get told otherwise from Petra. One question I wanted to put out on the issue of governance and governance across organizations is that normally, just to quote the sort of founding fathers, no taxation without representation. Normally, in environments where there is governance at play, stakeholders have some mechanism to express themselves. What are the sorts of tools you think platforms should use in order to understand what kind of governance friction is emerging? Because clearly you're not going to run a parliament with everybody. And are there specific techniques that you think are particularly relevant for platforms to understand those sorts of issues? And perhaps we can start with Sasha, go to Frédéric, and then end with Rob. And we've only got a minute, so sort of quick answers to this one.
Okay, so in our case, I think the main thing what we've done, and I think has generally been relatively successful, not always, is reaching out very early on when we go to a specific country or region, meeting stakeholders, above all regional stakeholders, policymakers, and letting them understand our business from day one. There are issues they will counter, and they want to know more about it, but I think that is very important. and also be very transparent with information about our company, data, how our algorithms work, who the profile, Rob mentioned it again, who the profile of the stakeholders on our platform. I think that's been the tool that's been most useful for us. And so far, I mean, generally it's working quite well.
Wonderful, thank you. Frédéric.
Well, I'll just try to say one thing which has been working well for us. It's making sure you've got a strong link between your customer support and your product team, and that they are not separate and that they talk a lot. Because usually your customer support is trying to fix quickly the problem that your members or your clients have with what they have. But if they don't have a voice to the product and tech team, then they stay in that state and they don't help the product to get improved on the long term. Sometimes improving the product may take like 6 or 12 or 18 months. But if you consider that customer support is dealing short term with the issues of the customers and product is dealing long term, but you don't have a bridge in between them, then you can't really have a strong governance, I think. So the main point is you can have a team which is a customer voice or member voice, which is a bridge between customer support and product.
Thank you. Rob, final word to you.
Oh, both of their points were so good. I'm just going to put them into 2 words that I think leaders need: humility and curiosity. So I think you need to, if you approach these sorts of issues where you're constantly listening and with real curiosity about how others are experiencing your product, and with a humility, with an openness to the fact that you may not have absolutely gotten it right and you may need to change course, I think you'll survive better in this environment.
Well, with that, thank you to our panelists, Rob Chesnut and Frédéric Mazzella and Sasha Michaud. I will be handing over, I believe, to Benoit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nearly to Benoit. One more time for me. Thank you so much, Azeem, Fred, Rob, and Sasha. I know I'm repeating myself, fascinating. And again, we could have continued much longer.